my name is Madeline and welcome to my channel, Cozy Cottage Chapters, and welcome to my March reading wrap-up. March was another very good reading month for me. So far this year has been really great in terms of reading, and I read lots of middle grade this month for middle grade March. But I also have some other kind of things to talk about and share with you. A really great middle grade reading month for me. I've discovered some new, I think, all-time favorite books. And yeah, I just had a really fabulous, wonderful reading month. I do have some things that'll be carrying over into April, mostly my Lent books. So I'm not really going to talk about those now because I'll share kind of all of my thoughts on them in April. Yeah, so this will be just the books that I finished in March. So let's just jump right into it. So the first book that I read this month was Penny from Heaven by Jennifer L. Holm. This is a middle grade book. It's historical fiction set right after World War II. And we are following this young girl, Penny, whose dad died when she was very young. She lives with her mom and her grandparents, her maternal grandparents. But she is also really close with her father's extended family. His family was all Italian, and so she has, this big, boisterous Italian extended family that she spends time with as well. But from the very beginning, we see that there's tension between her mom and her mom's family and her dad's family, and she doesn't really know why. Her mom doesn't want to talk about her dad or isn't really happy when she's spending time around his family. And we're just kind of following Penny over the course of this summer, and she's navigating these complex relationships in her family. She has this love of baseball. Her and one of her uncles absolutely adore baseball. This was a really fun, enjoyable middle grade book. It does take a turn that I was not really expecting towards the end. And there is, I don't want to give too much away because it happens really quickly at the end, but there is an element of history that is kind of played out in this book that is kind of an underknown event that happened in American history, and I really liked that. I really like when I read historical fiction and I learn something new. I learn about some sort of lesser known, under the radar kind of thing that happened, and that is definitely the case for this book. And so I really enjoyed that part of it. Next up is Dancing Peel by Lorna Hill. This was one of the books I said in my TBR that I absolutely have to get to in March. It has been a book that I've wanted to read for so long, and I've just been pushing it off, and March was finally the time. I finally read this, and I'm so glad I did because I enjoyed it so much. When I was reading this, I kept thinking if I read this book as a kid, I would have loved it so much. Like, this would have been a book I absolutely adored as a young reader. And we're following Annette Dancy and her brother Max. I think his name is Max. And they're both dancers. Annette is a ballerina, and Max mainly does like Spanish dance. And they live in Northumberland. They live in Northumberland in this old border fortress that is kind of falling apart, but they love it. It's home. And we're basically following Annette. She is an aspiring ballerina. She's training really hard, but she's not necessarily the best yet. And she's definitely experiences some kind of moments of being passed over and not really getting much recognition. This new family that comes to town, and the boy Angus and Annette do not get along very well in the beginning. They are kind of enemies, and we see things kind of slowly getting better and a friendship starting to form, and I really enjoyed that. I really liked seeing Annette's kind of development as a character, as a person, and how she comes to realize that maybe Angus isn't as bad as she thought he was, and trying to make amends and repair this relationship. So I really enjoyed this book. It's a series. I would love to get my hands on the other books and read them soon because this was just so cozy and wholesome and very lovely. with lots and lots of ballet references, which my former ballet loving heart appreciates a lot. More middle grade. This is going to be very middle grade heavy, but I have lots of middle grade and very good ones. And next up is Caddie Woodlawn by Carol Ryrie Brink. I talk all about this in a reading vlog, my Newbery reading vlog. So if you kind of want to see my thoughts and reactions throughout the book, you can check out that video. But I will just say I loved this book so, so much. It has lots of Little House vibes to it. So if you love the Little House series, I think you would really enjoy Caddie Woodlawn. Caddie in the Wisconsin frontier. And Caddie has some brothers, and she is raised more like a boy kind of than a girl. She runs around with her brothers, gets into trouble with them. You know, she's not a very typical. So this book is inspired by Carol Ryrie Brink's grandmother. So a lot of the stories are true, which I think is just so amazing, so brave and loving, and just such an amazing, amazing character. I really, really enjoyed reading this book, and I cannot wait to read more Carol Ryrie Brink. Caddie is such an amazing character. There were some truly lovely moments in this book, like when Caddie rides off to warn the Native Americans that the white settlers are planning an attack against them for like no good reason. And Caddie is really good friends with the chief of this tribe. She runs off to warn them and ends up making peace between the white settlers and the Native American tribes. And it's just so amazing, this young child who was so brave and saw this mistake that could have unfolded and did something about it to try to prevent things. There's also a moment where she does something incredibly kind for these children who are going through a hard time, and is selfless and just such a wonderful, wonderful character. So I loved Caddie Woodlawn. I listened to this on audio. I think I would recommend reading the book. The audiobook was not my favorite. The narration was just like a little bit hard to understand at times. I think it was like not super great audio quality. It was a little bit quiet, and I was listening with like my earbuds in, so I felt like I had to crank up the volume to just hear. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend the audiobook, but the story is absolutely wonderful. So this next book is also one of my Newbery books that I talk about, and that is The Bronze Bow by Elizabeth George Spear. This is historical fiction set in Galilee during the time of Jesus, and we are following this boy, Neil, who is involved in kind of some rebel faction groups. He, you know, is tired of living under Roman oppression, and he wants to free the people of Israel. He wants to rise up and be a warrior and fight back against the Romans. And he comes to learn, obviously, over the course of some encounters with Jesus and some other people, that you know, that's not the way forward. Violence is not going to solve his problems. Hatred is not going to make things better for him. And it is a really beautiful story. Writing in this book is absolutely stunning, so beautiful. The descriptions of everyday life were so rich, and I really, really enjoyed that about this book. I did get a little bit lost in the middle, just it dragged for me a little bit, but it's a really lovely story and a very, very good book. All right, next up is the Betsy Tacy Treasury by Maud Hart Lovelace. I read books 2, 3, and 4. So Betsy Tacy and Tib, Betsy and Tacy Go Over the Big Hill, and Betsy and Tacy Go Downtown. I had this on my TBR thinking I would maybe only read book 2, but I read book 2 and was like, I can't stop. I need to spend more time in this world with these characters, and so I kept on going. I read book 3 and I was like, let's keep going with book 4. And honestly, if I had the next collection of books, I would have kept reading them as well, because I just fell in love with Betsy and Tacy and Tib and this whole world that they're living in. I loved this so, so much. This is very much just a story of everyday life of these little girls who are growing up in at the turn of the century in this small town in Minnesota. So fun to see them just running around outside, going to visit neighbors that they don't know, being invited inside and being given, you know, cookies and milk and sent on their way. It's just so charming, and it feels like a totally different world than now. And I just enjoyed this so much. I especially liked the last two books in this Treasury because they have a bit more of a storyline. The first ones are a bit more episodic. You have each chapter is kind of its own little episode, its own little story. But books 3 and 4, you really get a bit more of a storyline, and yeah, there are some really heartwarming moments in these books. Some like wonderful lessons, and this is an all-time favorite for me now. I am so excited to continue on in this series and see these girls as they're growing up. I've heard that the later books are even better than these early ones, and that makes me so excited. Next up is one of 2 non-middle grade books that I read this month, and this one was actually nonfiction, so quite a bit different from some of my other reads, and that is Rembrandt is in the Wind by Russ Ramsey. So this one is nonfiction. It's a collection of, I believe it was 10 different artists, and he goes through, he kind of talks about their history, their background, some of their more famous works, and also relating it to faith. You can kind of approach these works of art looking through them of the lens of Christianity. It's a good mix of artists that I've heard of, that I maybe know a little bit about, but then also some that I didn't know at all. There are of course famous artists like Rembrandt, there's Michelangelo, there's Van Gogh, and then, you know, quite a few that I had not heard of. Particularly interested to learn about Lilias Trotter, who was a Victorian woman who had an insane natural talent for art. She was, you know, recruited by some of the best teachers, and she said no, basically. She did not want to study art. She wanted to be a missionary. She went to Algeria, spent years there ministering to people. Continued art, she continued drawing, made some books out of her art, paired with her writings as kind of devotional books. So that sounds really interesting and something I definitely want to check out, because her story was just really interesting. I had never heard of her, and her art is absolutely beautiful. I looked it up afterwards and really enjoyed her art. It was really interesting. This book I think is very beginner friendly. I don't know a lot about art or art history, and I found it very accessible, very approachable. I will say, like, in terms of the faith content, there was one part that was a little bit that I had a little bit more of a hard time with, and that was just some of his analysis and descriptions of Mary felt very Protestant. He is Protestant, he is coming from a Protestant standpoint and background, but it was just a little bit, it made me tense up when listening to it. I just had a hard time kind of with how he just dismissed Mary, and it didn't feel very great, honestly, to listen to that part. But overall, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I feel like this gives me a little bit more of an entry point into finding some different artists that I want to study and learn more about, or different periods in art history. And it's definitely a topic that I want to explore and read more about. So hopefully I will find some other books to continue on with this. Next up, another historical middle grade. Also, well, this one is set during World War II, and that is A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus. This was on my 30 books I want to read before I turn 30 list, so I was very happy to cross another one off of that list. And I anticipated this being a 5-star book, and it was. I loved this book so much. We're following these 3 siblings who are orphans. Their parents died when they were very young, and they've been raised by their grandma, but at the start of the book, their grandma has also passed away. So they have no family, no one to raise them. They do have quite a bit of money that they will come into, but no guardian. And their lawyer, their family's lawyer, comes up with this plan that since it is World War II and children in London are being evacuated to the countryside, that they will go with all of these children into the countryside, and hopefully the family that takes them in will fall in love with them and want to keep them after the war. It's not a great plan, but it's the best they really have at this moment, and so that's what happens. They go out to the countryside, they get taken in by a family, and the story goes on from there. It's really their quest to find a family, to find love, to find belonging. The relationships between these siblings are so sweet. They have a love of books, and we see them reading different stories throughout this novel, and we see them reading and finding so much solace in books, which is lovely. Any book lover will love that part of this book. This was such a sweet, sweet story. The writing is absolutely beautiful. I just cannot say enough good things about this book. I enjoyed it so much. It was cozy and a quick read for me. Finally, I finished Dynevor Terrace by Charlotte Mary Yonge. So I read Volume 1 last month in February, and I read Volume 2 in March. So this is quite a chunky little book. I read it on my Kindle, so I don't know exactly how many pages it was, but it felt like I was reading this book for a long time. But despite its size, I really, really enjoyed this book and was just sucked into it. We're basically following this family, these two branches of a family, and Mary and Louis are kind of the main characters. I keep calling him Louis, like saying it the French way. I don't know if that's right, but I'm just going to do it because the entire time I was reading it in my head, he was Louis. So I'm going to continue calling him Louis in the French way. But anyway, we're following Mary and Louis, and they are cousins. They were raised together as children, and then Mary was sent to go live with her parents who were in Peru. Yes, they are in Peru. She gets sent to Peru, but then her mom gets sick, and so her and her mom travel back to England and are kind of reunited with this family. And we're following them, Mary and Louis. There are also other characters, other cousins, other extended members of the family that we get to meet that are all so lovely. Every character in this book is really a treat to read about. There are some that are maybe less desirable, but still you root for them and you want the best for them, even the ones that are not that great. But especially Mary and Louis are such wonderful characters. I loved them so much. They're so wise, make good choices, they do the right thing even when it's really, really hard, and they're just very admirable characters to read about. I particularly loved Louis. He has such good advice that he gives people who are often in really complicated or challenging situations. He can be very honest with them and tell them, you know, you're making a bad choice, but he's also very comforting, and he tries to help them, and he tries to give them reasonable steps that they can make to go forward. And it's not just condemnation and like you're doing the wrong thing. He's also very encouraging and tries to help them along and tries to make things better. He's just such a lovely character, someone you would want as a friend because he just really looks out for the people he cares about. But anyways, there's some travel in this story. They end up in Paris during the Revolution. They end up in Peru, and it's just a really, really fun story. There's travel and, you know, a plot that's going on. It's also just very domestic and a lot of descriptions of everyday life. There's beautiful writing, beautiful descriptions of nature, and I just really, really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was a very easy 5 stars for me, and I am looking forward to reading more Charlotte Mary Yonge because I have heard so many good things about her books. And then my last book that I finished this month was The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. This was on my TBR as well. I did a really good job reading from my TBR this month. I didn't get through everything, but I read quite a few things that I had put on my TBR. And I saw so many people in the comments say that they have either never read this book or they read it as an adult and really, really loved it. And so I was very excited to pick this up, and I'm glad I squeezed it in kind of just in the last couple days of the month. But basically we're following Milo, who gets this strange package, and it is a car, and it is a pedal car, and he goes on this adventure through the land of wisdom and meets all of these strange, interesting characters who, you know, have different lessons to teach him. What I really loved about this book was the way that it plays with language and words. There are so many kind of interesting turns of phrases and just ways that language is used. It's a lot of fun. It made me laugh out loud. I think that some of this would be maybe lost on kids or would go over their heads, and reading it as an adult, you just see kind of the genius that went behind it. I've never read Alice in Wonderland, but I feel like it has kind of similar out there vibes to it, but this is maybe less out there than Alice in Wonderland. It's a bit easier to understand what's going on and digest, but there are just some real kind of kooky characters in this story, some real kind of interesting things. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. It was a fun read. It made me laugh. It was just really, really enjoyable. It's also very thought-provoking, and there's definitely a sense of allegory in this story. And yeah, like I said, there were some really kind of profound moments too that I think adults would especially appreciate in this book. So if you never read it as a kid, it's not too late. I think reading The Phantom Tollbooth as an adult is very much worth it, and it was a very fun, interesting read. The camera cut me off, but anyways, like I was saying, I had such a good reading month in March, and I'm really looking forward to reading some kinds of different things in April, stepping away from middle grade a little bit. And I posted my April TBR recently, so if you haven't seen that, you can check that out for my reading plans for the upcoming month. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye!